I want to tell you about a new book I've written called LIGHTQUEST, which is basically the end product of 35 years of research. I mean, I've done a few other books along the way, as some of you will know, but I've really tried to get my teeth into understanding exactly what the UFO phenomena is, how we interact with it, you know, how there is some relationship between us and the phenomena, exactly what's going on, and not just from the perspective of the mystery lights and things like that that you can see in this area, but also the close encounter, the abduction experience, missing time, everything. And in many ways I'm sort of trying to take it slightly away from the most obvious answers to this solution, which is that everything is, you know, made of nuts and bolts, alien hardware, you know, flesh and blood aliens and all the rest of it. I'm not saying that there isn't a place for that, but I want to see it as far more exotic, far more interesting, and I think that in many ways it's something that a lot of people that I know, that a lot of people that are probably into crop circles and that spend a lot of time, I think that their attitude towards the phenomena is much better, I think, than, you know, than some people are. Probably realise that there is something simply, you know, the sort of extraterrestrial version of Boeing 747s out there somewhere. So, you know, what I want to take you is in a journey, because the book itself is designed to allow you to know what to do when you go there, and how you yourself can possibly have some kind of interaction with this phenomena. Let's first slide, please. Now, the first story that I want to talk to you about, which I cover in detail in the book, is something that occurred at the end of July 1994. And it was a couple from the Midlands. Basically, they were just getting into crop circles for the first time. They wanted to come down, you know, experience the atmosphere, the ambience of the place, and they decided to go out onto the top of Silbury Hill. It's got a good observation place. You know, I've done it myself many times. It's a great place to be. And they were there with some other friends who left around midnight, just as a heavy mist started enveloping the whole of the area, or certainly the area around Silbury Hill. They could still see in the distance and that. And then, next slide please, if I may. Then the next thing they knew is that they could see two orange balls of light. They described them almost like balls of fire in the vicinity of the West Kennet Long Barrow. Now this is a long barrow perched on a ridge just to the south of Silbury Hill. I'm sure almost everybody here has actually been there and experienced the place themselves. And they looked at these lights, and at first they thought, well, it's probably somebody actually, you know, up there, you know, people with some kind of fire, you know, things juggling, or doing something mundane. But these lights, or these balls of fire, as I say more specifically, started coming down the track to start with, and then crossing the field in the direction of where they were on Silbury Hill. Now, these got closer and closer, and of course, the closer they got, and by the way, although two of their friends had gone, one of them actually remained behind, so there's three of them watching this. And these balls of fire then came right to the edge of the field, just beyond the A4 road, and then went onto the road itself and illuminated the tarmac beneath, and they could actually see the road. And at this point, you know, obviously their inquisitiveness, you know, is absolutely at the maximum, and they wonder what the hell is actually going to happen next. At which point the female there, Sonia, she gets out a lamp and just turns it on, bearing in mind that there was quite a lot of mist around. I mean, not enough to block what you could actually see. And these two objects just stopped suddenly, and they could actually see evolving directly beneath the actual balls of fire. Next slide, please. these strange tetrahedrons with like almost like sort of like electrical spark-like fires going down the corners, and these strange light beings seated within them in what appeared to be a virtual sort of lotus position, a Buddhist lotus position. Then they could see this momentarily, and they you know, all saw it, all witnessed it, so it seemed to be quite physically real. But then this vision of the tetrahedrons vanished again to leave just these two balls of light, at which point they rose up the side of Silbury Hill and actually came level to where they were on the hill, at which point, obviously mesmerised by what they could see, there was a blinding flash of light that came from the objects. Now, before I describe what happens next, the thing is that as they were at their closest, they said that there seemed to be an electrostatic charge in the air, but there seemed to be almost like a chatter going on between the two objects. It's almost like they were talking to each other or talking to them or something. It seemed to be some kind of almost a communication-like thing that was going on. Now, whether this was a subjective thing or real or what, you know, is a matter of interpretation. But at which point, as I say, there was like a blinding flash, then it all goes wobbly, basically, and then the next thing they know, the two objects are back down the base of the hill, at which point they cross the road again, go into the field opposite, condense down into one single object, which is more like a white light by this time. Next slide, please. And suddenly they could see two light beings actually coming out of this ball of fire, hand in hand, and just standing there in mid-air momentarily before going back inside the objects and disappearing. At which point the object then shrinks down to a tiny ball of light, at which the first car comes along the road, so, you know, during the whole of the experience. And this tiny ball of light then just vanishes into the hedgerow. And after the car's gone, the ball of light comes out and goes around the back of the hill and is lost. And at which point they see like these sparkling lights opposite Silbury towards the south, which then just move away out of sight. And basically that's the end of that experience. I mean, it's a little bit more complex than that, but you know, you get the gist of it. Now, this is quite an extraordinary sequence. I mean, I've spoken on a number of occasions to the witnesses. I know them pretty well now, and you know, I am happy to accept that what they saw was real phenomena. They speak about it very articulately, very intellectually, but they see it not as the product of some kind of alien hardware, but of something that's almost interdimensional, something that's multidimensional, something that's existing not just on our physical plane, but is manifesting into our realm, into our reality on a temporary basis. They also felt as if there was an interaction between themselves, or their minds more specifically, their consciousness, and the objects themselves. Almost as if what they saw was like some kind of display put on for them. And they also accept that the intelligence that they quite clearly felt was behind this was within the balls of light, the balls of fire, these orange balls of fire themselves, and that the tetrahedrons, the light beings, this was almost like some kind of display for them. The real intelligence was almost like this pure energy within these balls themselves. Next slide, please. So, I mean, obviously, this is very close to Avebury, and the importance of telling this story, not just because it's something which is on offer to anybody that wants to spend a bit of time in this area, which I would call a UFO hotspot, but there are patterns relating to UFO hotspots that are repeatable, not just in this country, not just in the States, which is somewhere also featured quite heavily, but clearly around the world in general. And that is that you will find that where these mystery lights appear, there are patterns of other things as well. you'll find that the geology is rich in fault lines, tectonic stress underneath it, minerals, metals, things like that. You'll find that there's a history of phenomena relating to this type of appearance of strange lights going back hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, for instance, we're talking about the area around Avebury here. As many of you will know, there's a number of different sightings of mysterious lights and things like this within the past 20, 30 years. But in the book, I quote a case from the 18th century of great lights being seen over one of the barrows just outside of Avebury as you get towards the sanctuary. And in fact, the local people became so concerned about this that they asked an antiquarian by the name of Drax, who was working on Silbury Hill at the time, to actually investigate the barrow, because they felt that the lights were somehow guarding or marking the position of some kind of buried treasure, and that, you know, he should investigate, and therefore the lights would presumably go away thereafter. But you know, this is a case. Plus, there are a number of other cases of the Avebury Downs, the Downs of Wiltshire in generally, producing strange lights which were in the past known as jack-o'-lantern, will-o'-the-wisp, even spunky, bizarrely enough, were all terms used for mysterious lights. You know, plus, we're not just talking about little floaty things here. As we saw from the case I just showed from Silbury Hill in 1994, this is where close encounters occur as well, and missing time cases and even UFO abductions. They are all focused around particular areas. You know, in other words, a UFO hotspot is not somewhere that produces pretty little lights. You know, this is where you can go for the full-on interaction, the full-on close encounter, if you are extremely lucky, if luck is the right word to use. Next slide, please. As an example of, obviously, a will-o'-the-wisp here of the sort that you see on the Wiltshire Downs. Next slide, please. Okay, now, one of the cases that's in the book, talking about the area around Avebury, is, again, I mean, a number of the cases that are in the book have never, ever been published before. And this is an example. Back in about, I think it was 1997, don't quote me on that because I can't remember the exact date. Sorry, yep.
Just don't mind me asking, how come they've never ever been published before?
Because...
How do you know about it?
How? Because people trust me, basically, with this information. And also, once they see the write-up that I do of it, they're quite happy to say, this is the best portrayal that I've had. Other people have looked at what's happened, and we've not been happy, or we've not been happy to let this information out, so because we've not...
These are cases of recent times?
And all people I know, yeah, this is the thing, yeah. So, okay, this is a photographer, lives in this area, but he was also working for a TV company getting ambient footage, basically just footage that they could use within, you know, news stories, and he went up one morning, I think it was in 1997, we'll check this, to the sanctuary just outside of Avebury, and the idea was simply to get some panning shots across the countryside, which, you know, he'd been asked to do, and he was panning across with this sunny sort of camcorder, state-of-the-art stuff at the time, and he noticed something going on above one of the mounds towards the south at an area known as Hairstone Down. And so he zoomed in on this, and I mean, the distance from where he was to the thing is probably about 3 miles away. It's not close. And he saw this strange object above the barrow. Here's the barrow here. It's not this one in the foreground, the one behind that. And it's a Bronze Age barrow, probably dates to, I don't know, something like around 1500 BC. It might contain a burial, or it certainly would have done in the past. And as I said, stories like this of these strange lights being seen over the Bronze Age barrows in the area have certainly been around for hundreds of years. He looking at this, and he actually watched this for a period of up to 45 minutes. And it was above the barrow, and it just seemed to be moving around, not doing an awful lot at all. But what he didn't realise until he looked at the footage was that there was a second object going round in an arc, which, if you speed up the footage across the whole 45 minutes, you can actually see it making this arc all the way round, or certainly around at least 1/4 of the actual barrow itself. Now, I've seen the footage a few times, and every time I look at it, it's just very strange. And I know that the few people that have seen it, and it's never been shown publicly ever, simply because, you know, the guy, I'm not even going to give his name, is a guy of high standing in society. He also poo-poos a lot of claimed UFO sightings and films and videos and things like that. You know, but what he took himself, he believes is something that is quite strange, and he's quite happy to show it, you know, to a few people again who he trusts. Now, he did his ambient footage after this and then went back to it, and the object afterwards was actually much higher in the air above the horizon, so you could actually just still see it. Now, what's the possible explanations for this if you're looking for a logical answer? Well, it's either a child's balloon tethered, or the movement of the object was just too much for it to be a balloon, and by the time that he came back to it, it was much higher. Or it's a bird, and birds are not going to be hovering at the same spot for 45 minutes, you know, and then hovering even higher at a later point. And to be honest, having observed this, it's just clearly not. And at one point, next slide please, here's just a few stills from it. At one point, the object above the barrow, which you can see in this top frames here, a smaller object comes from it and swings around it for a while, almost as if it's on like some kind of orbit of it, and then reintegrates with that object, and it becomes one again, which is just bizarre. But this is very similar to phenomena that's been observed and filmed at a place called Hessdalen in Norway, where there have been scientific expeditions and surveys sponsored by universities to look at strange light phenomena that's been occurring in a mountain valley there, which we'll come on to. Next slide, please. Okay, now, one of the other places that's featured in the book is a place called Martha in Texas. Now, here you've actually got a observational platform complete with toilets and telescopes, all the rest of it, to look at the strange lights that appear towards the south in the area of this desert, which is known as the Chihuahua Desert, and it's actually quite close to the Mexican border. And the phenomena here was first observed back in the mid-1800s. The earliest settlers reaching the area, you know, saw these mysterious lights, and they would thought that they had something to do with the local Native American Indian tribe. But by the time they eventually got to meet them and talk to them, they said, you know, that the Native Americans said, no, it's nothing to do with us. You know, it's the ghost of the ancestors that appear. And that was the beginning of something that's known as the Martha Lights. Next slide, please. Oh, that's me. Now, as I say, okay, now, I put hotspots there to remind me that, as I say, there are a number of places around the world that I would call UFO hotspots. In fact, there are probably a lot more than what we ever realise. But they're places, as I said, where this phenomenon seems to repeat year in, year out, seems to occur. But the importance of trying to tell you about this, as I said, we're not just dealing with pretty lights here. Next slide, please. Here's just a few examples of the phenomena that occurs at Martha. Now, there's a guy there by the name of Bonnell who's written a whole book on the Martha Lights. I mean, he monitors the area every night. He's got these remote cameras that they're triangulated, all the rest of it. They're triggered off by activity, and you know, they work on all sorts of different frequency levels, all the rest of it. And you know, he's really done the work to try and capture and understand what's going on here. And he's actually concluded that there's two types of lights involved. One, he feels is combustible. It's almost like some kind of fire. You know, it's almost like a sort of chemical fire, if you like. But the other, and all this is based on the frequencies that you know, spectral cameras, all the rest of it seem to suggest is actually there. And the other thing is plasma. Well, we'll come on to that in a moment. Next slide, please. Oh, and here's another example of the object. Now, as I said, you know, this is quite large stuff. Now, if you look at this, there's no way that you're not going to say that that's a UFO. I mean, obviously, a UFO simply means just unidentified flying object, but it has that emotional connection, an emotional thing of exactly what's going on here. Now, just down the road, when I was here, I went to Roswell, New Mexico, and the attitude there towards the phenomena was entirely different to what it is at Martha. At Martha, there was a few shops selling memorabilia and all the rest of it, but the cups there just had weird little pretty lights on them and whatever. Whereas if you go to Roswell, everything is alien greys, plastic aliens, and all the rest of it. Everything is a foregone conclusion that any phenomena that's involved has got something to do with nuts and bolts, alien hardware coming down here. And it's so refreshing to go somewhere like Martha where that same attitude is not there. Next slide, please. And the importance here, as I mentioned earlier, geology. There's an incredible amount of fault lines and geology and minerals, mercury, silver, all the rest of it are all mined in this area. And I'm sure there's a relationship here. There's a connection with the type of landscape involved. Next slide, please. Here's just an example of something. Right, that will do. No, the next one. No, next one. Right, okay. Now, the reason for that one in here is to remind myself that there are also close encounters that occur. I mean, for instance, a number of people have decided to go out on their car on the ranch roads and see if they can sort of get up close and personal to these lights. Well, the first thing that seems to happen is that the lights play games with them. They see the lights, they go towards them, and suddenly the lights blink out, and you know, they turn around, and there they are behind them. So they turn around, go towards them, and exactly the same thing happens. Again and again, you get this, that the lights seem to be playing with them. It's almost as if they have like this playful sentience, which comes up again and again. And I mean, obviously not just at Martha, but you know, around the world in general. But one particular case, which I was intrigued with, and the guy concerned actually ended up writing his own little private book about this, is that he went out onto the ranch road into the desert there, and he saw an object come quite close to him. He was there in his car, and the object just came to a halt and then just started disgorging a whole load of small objects. And these small objects just went around in the air, made pretty patterns, and then came back and rejoined the central object. And to be honest, I think it really affected this guy, and because you know, the way that he's written this up is that before this time, he'd assumed these things were just some kind of, you know, pretty thing to see, you know, out in the desert. But he realised at this point that, in his words, there was a supernatural quality, a supernatural element. In other words, there was a sentience, an intelligence involved with these. And I think it absolutely changed his perspective forever as to what was going on here. Right, next slide, please. Okay, I mentioned it earlier on, and here it is. As I say, a place called Hesdalen. It's marked there in Norway. Next slide, please. And over from about the early 1980s, it began. But literally hundreds, if not thousands, of reports of lights. Now, this is a remote area. There's a small village community here who also see, you know, not just lights but more structured forms and whatever. But the Hessdalen project has been going, funded by a number of universities, and they've been seeing, recording, both as stills and in video photography, a number of very strange forms, including quite clearly, you know, what I'd call constructs, light objects that are made of a number of lights all together, like this one here, which you can see, you know, just above this forest line. Next slide, please. And as I said, there seems to be a sentience with this. This is what the actual scientists reported, and there are a number of scientific reports that have been done in strange lights around the world, not just, you know, here in Hessdalen, but in several sites in America, and all of the scientists involved, and there's a whole introduction all about this work in the different areas, and all the scientists come back and conclude two things. Firstly, that the phenomena acts with some kind of sentience, that there is some connection and interaction between the people and the phenomena itself, but also that one of the key things that keeps coming up is this word plasma, that plasma is possibly some kind of explanation for what's going on. Now, just keep that word for the moment, and we'll come back onto it eventually. Next slide, please. Conscious light forms energy constructs. Well, you know, these are the sort of terms which I'm sort of beginning to use in the book. Call them like UFOs if you want, call them alien vehicles, call them whatever you want. But, you know, I think we're dealing with something that is far more nebulous in many ways, but can manifest into a much more solid form on occasions, on a temporary level. Next slide, please. And this is the case at Hessdalen, because although you get these nice pretty lights and constructs, the villagers there have reported on a number of occasions more structured craft. Here is an example of one of the things, a strange sort of cigar-shaped object that was seen going, you know, through the air. Now, and the way that they describe them is quite weird. It's almost like, you know, it's almost like there's nothing there, then suddenly it's there, and then it vanishes as well. It's almost like some kind of portal or gateway opens, and they see this phenomena, and then suddenly it's not there again. I mean, it seems to be tangible, it seems to be real, and yet there's something missing as far as its connection. You know, it's not like looking up at the sky and seeing a Boeing 747 crossing. Although it has a tangibility, there is something unreal about it as well. Next slide, please.
Is that a computer-generated mock-up to show?
Oh yeah. No, it's not a.
Not a real.
No.
I thought so.
Yeah. Here's just another example. Just, you know, something that looks like a bullet with a couple of lights at the end with a red light. Now, clearly, this is the sort of stuff that's been reported in UFO lore for the last, you know, 65 years or whatever. But the importance about this is that this is appearing in somewhere that is being scientifically studied and seems to have the right qualities relating to the landscape itself. It seems to have the right geological factors, the right environmental conditions, whatever they may be, so they are the manifestation of this type of phenomena. And as I said, you know, let's call them UFO hotspots, other people call them window areas, or things like this. Lady got I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Has anybody ever been able to actually give an alien a gift from us?
I don't know. Let's talk about that at the end if we can. In the questions. Next slide, please. Right. Another place which I cover is the Dovedale in Derbyshire. Now this is another place that is definitely a window area or a UFO hotspot. I mean, there's a great story. I mean, there's a number of cases here that go back hundreds of years. The reports of mysterious lights being referred to as the lights of the fairies, will-o'-the-wisps, the lights of phantom, coaches, coach of horses, things like this, that were seen in this vicinity of the Dovedale. And these type of phenomena are still being reported today. I mean, there's one great case of these two students that park in the car park at the base of the Dovedale Valley, and they just go for a walk along the River Dove here. It's a very pleasant experience. You can do it in the evening. You're probably going to be on your own if you do. And they reached a spot where this weir was, and they just saw these two balls of light appear. They were like just globes, and they were in the air, and they seemed to dance about, and they seemed to dance about in a manner which seemed to suggest some kind of set pattern or motion. As if there was almost like some kind of code connected with it. In other words, if you understood it properly, that there is something to be understood about exactly what's going on. Anyway, it completely freaked them out, as you can imagine, and eventually that they just went back to the car and went off. Now, one of the students, he told his friends, they didn't believe him, and he came back with another friend at a later point, went back and went beyond this point to some caves, and also witnessed a light then. So, it was a repeatable thing. But in this very same area, there's an incredible case which I quote in there, which is of a couple who were driving through this area, not specifically here, but not far away, and they saw an object in the sky, like a blue object, and they tried to follow it. And a lot of very strange things started occurring, and then the next thing they know, they just suddenly were in the Dovedale, and they recognised that they went over a cattle grid, just sort of clicked out of almost like this sort of hypnotic trance, if you like, realised that were hours missing from their life. They turned around, the car went towards their destination, and then the whole thing went blank again, and the next thing they know, they were in Macclesfield, which is a hell of a long way away from here. And yet the strange thing is that although they had this missing hour, which was several hours long, the amount of petrol that they actually used in the car was only consistent of the journeys that they actually remember. And this is something that was checked out by a guy by the name of David Clark, who's a UFO researcher and writer, and correspondent for the Fortean Times, and he wrote all about this. So this is not just something that they claimed, and this seems to have actually been true. Next story, next slide, please. And in the same area is a place called the Nine Stones Close. It's a remnant of a stone circle, presumably originally 9 stones, but now only 4. And a mysterious blue globe is said to rise out of the local wood there and come across to these stones. Now this is not far away from Dovedale, in the same area. That very wood, there's a fault line going all the way through it. Next slide, please. Now, Rendlesham, obviously this is a place that is home to probably one of the most famous UFO cases, not just in Britain, but in the world. Obviously, as you probably know, some airmen on December 26, 1980, saw some weird lights over the local forest. They were at the air base of at Woodbridge. They went out to investigate and came across a clearing where they could see like this multiple light form. Next slide, please. Go back to that one. Yep. And they could see this very strange object. Now, the closer they got to it, the more it seemed to take form. And this is really interesting. I mean, Jenny Randall's done a great book on this subject. I think it's called UFO Crash Landing. that's the best book, I would say, on this, the whole subject of the Rendlesham Forest case. Because a lot of it is the original accounts of the airmen involved, and what they say is absolutely fascinating, because what they say is that this wasn't some kind of, you know, alien vessel or something like this. It was like this evolving... Right? So this evolving form that seemed to keep changing the closer they got. And they said that they felt this powerful electrostatic effect around them as they were actually, you know, getting close. But it got to the point where they felt that they were actually like wading through mud. They could hardly even walk as they were trying to get closer and closer to this object through sort of curiosity, I suppose, and from a military perspective of trying to understand what it was and to try and sort of confront it in some ways. Now, as you probably know, as far as the... Right, put it like this? Yeah. Okay. The closer they got to it, the more reality seemed to warp completely. But, you know, they eventually, the object eventually rose up, disappeared, and they went back to the base. Now, there's some talk that there might be some kind of missing time involved, but, you know, if it was quite short. But most people see this object in terms of something that came here because it was interested in the base, the nuclear armament that was at Woodbridge and nearby Bentwaters Air Base, the two twin bases together. And yet, when Matt turns the next slide over, you'll say, don't worry, no problems, is that, that this phenomena has been going on at Rendlesham for hundreds of years. A 14 researcher by the name of Alan Murdy actually uncovered cases of mysterious lights appearing in Rendlesham Forest, or right on the edge of it, in the 19th century. And there are a number of other cases all the way along which show that this type of phenomena has been going on there. As I said, the same places where the close encounters occur, where the missing time occurs, the abductions, are exactly the same places where these strange, mysterious lights... It's all part of the same phenomena. We're dealing with the same thing. There is no disconnection here. Right, next slide, please. And what's going on at Rendlesham, right, may be even older than that, because obviously many of you will know of the story of Beowulf, the Anglo-Saxon tale of this hero that defeats a monster by the name of Grendel. Well, this was written in around the 9th century. Believe it or not, it was written at Rendlesham. The Grendel isn't just some sort of fictional creation of this tale. This was an actual demon monster that was thought to haunt the area around Rendlesham. And it was said that its appearance would be heralded by these baleful lights, which were its eyes. And, I mean, this is really fascinating to me because, you know, if similar lights to what have been seen in Rendlesham for the past couple of years, couple of hundred years, were being seen in Anglo-Saxon times, and you know, you've got guys out in the woods and suddenly they see a couple of big lights, you know, are they going to see it as the eyes of this demon monster? Almost certainly. And it's going to be the sign to get out of there because, you know, these demon monsters like Grendel and the other Anglo-Saxon supernatural creature known as Black Shuck, which was another dog like this. You know, they bring baleful influences, they bring bad omens and things like that. You know, it's felt that confronting them is not a good idea, and that possibly even death or illness will follow from it. You know, so there's a good chance that the phenomena that those airmen encountered in 1980 is a part of something that's been going on there for literally thousands of years. Next slide, please. Okay, back to America now. In 1976, 4 guys go out on a canoeing trip fishing, night fishing. They're in a very remote area. It's called the Allagash Waterway in Maine, in New England. They'd already been out there, you know, a week or so, and they'd already seen one strange light one night. And they're out on this lake, and they see this ball of light over the trees of the forest, and it seems to be coming closer. And then this is no tiny little light, this is a massive great light. And it comes across, and they can see it. They describe it as plasmatic in nature, plasma-like in appearance. They can see almost like what they describe as like these sort of magnetic fields going up and down it. You know, like as if like you know, like the iron filings create that same type of patterns, but they were going on within the lights. Anyway, this object comes across, and at one point, one of the guys decides that he would get the torchlight out and flash it. At which point, the object immediately makes a beeline directly towards them, comes over the water, and drops a beam of light into the water itself, which then goes over their boat, at which the whole thing goes wobbly again. The next thing they know, they are back on the shore, and a fire that they built as a beacon, bear in mind there was it was absolutely pitch darkness there, and they needed a beacon to mark where exactly they camped on the beach. They'd lit one. They'd only been out onto the water about 15-20 minutes. This fire should have lasted for at least 3 hours, was now just basically embers. They'd lost at least 3 hours from their life. Now, many years later, they suffered strange dreams and things like this, but many years later, they underwent hypnosis. Next slide, please. And this revealed an on-board experience. In other words, that they'd supposedly been taken aboard some kind of a vessel and undergone a very, very traumatic medical examination, extremely traumatic stuff, you know, and then sort of been put back down. And yet, here, we're not dealing with some kind of, you know, structured vehicle at all. We're just dealing with a ball of light. That's all they saw, all they experienced. You know, that dropped down a beam, that completely, you know, enveloped the vessel and the four guys, and they have this experience. They lose 3 hours. You know, so in other words, these balls of light, they're not just playful like dolphins or whatever. It's these that can cause and create the abduction experience. So in other words, you don't actually need, you know, a spacecraft with nuts and bolts, you know, to provide the space for an on-board experience. You know, it happens anyway. In other words, I think that what we call missing time or abduction experiences are all part of the same phenomena to do with these, you know, these balls of light, these light constructs, these light energy forms. And here we have these aliens that they encountered. Obviously, you know, I got an artist to reproduce this for the front cover of LIGHTQUEST. This is what they saw, these almost insect-headed creatures. Now, you know, are these aliens real? Are they really made of flesh and blood? And how could they possibly be inside just a ball of light, a plasma ball of light? It doesn't seem to really make absolute sense here, unless we are looking at things in a slightly wrong way. Next slide, please. Right, okay. Let's just skip this. This is just Warminster stuff. Let's go on. Next slide, please. Right, yeah, I've got to tell you about this case because this is local. It's a guy by the name of Mike Booth, who I know, had a number of conversations, and he was not far from here. He was cycling from Marlborough on a route that incorporated Lockeridge, which is obviously, you know, just 4 or 5 miles just up the road here, just beyond Knapp Hill. And this was in 2005. The actual day was the summer solstice, which was June the 21st. You know, I mean, he wasn't connected with the mysteries or anything like that. He was just out on a sort of power cycle run, basically. He had all the gear on and everything. And he was coming down the hill from Marlborough. He'd been through Lockridge, and he was coming up to the wooded area on the left called Westwoods, where there is the fields that roll up to the edge of the woods. Many of you will know it. Crop circles have appeared in this general area. When he actually saw three strange objects, this is his, I mean, he's an artist as well, three strange objects actually in the field, and they were about, in his words, a couple of metres long by about a metre wide, and they seemed to be going over the very young wheat at the time, which was probably only about a couple of feet in height, still green, and seemed to be just pushing it down, just very gently, and they were moving along just at a few miles an hour, and he wondered what the hell this was, so he stopped with his bicycle and worked out that what he was looking at here was not some kind of terrestrial technology. This was something completely out of the ordinary, something, in his words, otherworldly. So he thought, well, I'll try and move close. So I'll get off my bike, and I've got a camera phone in my holdall. I'll get that out and I'll get some photographs. At which point, these objects just suddenly stopped, dead, and he felt within him that not to get off the bike, as if he was being told not to move, and just to move on. Don't take the camera phone out of your bag, just move on. You're not meant to see this. You're not meant to see this. It's nothing for you. And this annoyed him and angered him, because he felt that he was being controlled. That something was going on here, that he was being prevented from doing something that he wanted to do, and that annoyed him. But he could not fight it. And so he remained on his bike, and the next thing he knows, he was actually just driving away. He remembers driving away, and then bang, the next thing he knows, he was on Fifield Down above Avebury. This would have been part of his cycle route, by the way, so, you know, we're not saying he didn't cycle here. Having no knowledge of how he got there, or of cycling to that spot. And then the next thing he knows, he's at his home in Marlborough, still in his cycling stuff, pacing around the room. He suddenly comes to and has no recall at all of this journey. And the next few days, he said, the days were just a blur. And eventually, something happened that just clicked him out of it, almost like some kind of post-hypnotic, cue. And suddenly thought, oh my God, what the hell happened? So the first thing he did was he went back to the spot, and he actually found that the crop had been just very lightly pushed down. I mean, we're not talking about making crop formations or anything here. We're just talking about the fact that and he's actually got photographs of this. Now, this guy, I mean, he's extremely believable, very credible, talks very, intellectually about what happened. And when he was telling me this, I remember thinking, this is just bizarre, because, you know, he's suggesting that this phenomena can actually affect our minds, can actually create almost a type of mind over matter. And this, you know, in a way, I mean, I was writing the book at this time, and he was telling me a story, and I just thought, this just puts it on a completely different level. If what he's saying is true, you know, this phenomena doesn't just sort of communicate with us or commune with us, can actually control our minds, and that's actually quite a disturbing thought. And if you look into the annals of UFO lore, you'll find that there is actually a lot of this, and that it actually goes back many hundreds of years to fairy encounters, all the rest of it, that people that encounter, you know, the fairies and the fairy realm seem to lose control of their capabilities and almost come under the control, the spell of the phenomena that they're actually witnessing themselves. And this definitely seems to have been the case with Mike Booth. And, you know, I've looked into the case. I cannot find any explanation for what actually happened to him. It is absolute mystery, and I cover this in detail in the book, because I think that there's something profoundly interesting about what actually happened to him. I think that he witnessed something that was on almost another level of reality. You know, that it was something he shouldn't have seen because it doesn't exist in our world. He just happened to almost break through into a sort of altered reality which I think that anybody else possibly going along that same road may not have even seen the same thing. They may not have even seen him. Because the one thing he said that during the whole of the experience, he has no recall of any cars going along that road. And anybody that knows that road will know that you're getting the vehicles along there, you know, at least every minute. So, you know, it was almost like he was sort of shunted out of what you might see as normal space-time into what I called a drive-through universe, or almost like a bubble universe, that this almost happened in somewhere that doesn't exist within our realm. But it does because it has our physicality with it. So it's almost like an extension of our own reality. And then suddenly, at the end of it, he's plonked back into our realm. And he has this memory of what happens, which doesn't conform with anything that we know or really understand about. I mean, how do you fit this into anything? You can't really. This is, you know, I mean, he said that these objects were very shining and very, very smooth, very, very aerodynamic. But that was his background. He had a background in aerodynamics and design. So that's the way that his brain perceived it. But, you know, this was a very, very real experience. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, we'll just go on to the realm of fairy here. As I said, you know, what's been going on in the last 70 years, I mean, I say 70 years, I mean, obviously 1947 was basically the inception of the modern era of the flying saucer. It's something which is the latest version of something that's been with us for many hundreds, if not thousands of years. And in the past, we saw it in association with the realm of the fairies. We probably saw it in the realms of demons, of angels and gods and goddesses. I mean, there's one case that's that I quote in the book of from about 1905, that sort of period, from Wales, of a guy that a ball of light comes down right in front of him, and he's looking at this. He's a God-fearing Christian guy, and suddenly there's Jesus standing right in front of him, like this. And at which point, suddenly, he said he's transported with Jesus to paradise, the terrestrial paradise. And, you know, he's flying over paradise being shown the kingdom of God. Now, what the hell? I mean, and then suddenly, Jesus has gone, and all that's left is the ball of light that then moves away. This was the experience that this guy had. You know, today we're seeing that this phenomena as alien hardware. You know, from a more colloquial folklore perspective, we saw it from, you know, as more to do with the fairies, the elves, the goblins, all the rest of it. But clearly, it's something that coexists with us, something that's always with us, and something that manifests in a way which is acceptable to us. Next slide, please. Okay, here's just an image. Now, what's interesting about a lot of the fairy abductions, because there was abductions by fairies long before there were ever alien abductions. And what generally would happen is that, you know, somebody would be walking along a path across a field that they would know, they'd probably do it every day, and then they would see like this what they'd say a fairy house with a light. Now, the fairy house was probably, you know, what we call today like a barrow. Like on the left-hand side here, you can see like this little barrow, this earthen barrow, but there's a door. And these doors wouldn't normally be there, and these would be doors of light. They would go towards them, they would go into them, and the fairies would be playing. You can see them dancing and playing, as you can see here. Next slide, please. And there are many, many cases. I mean, I quote dozens of them, but, well, not dozens, but many of them, which so parallel modern UFO abductions. It's incredible. Even down to the fact that some of them involved, it says little grey men. I mean, I just find it absolutely bizarre. And what usually happens is that people, you know, go into this what I'd call a bubble universe, this sort of alternative realm. The fairies are dancing and all the rest of it. And it's said that, you know, they'll dance, you know, their mate who was with them will leave them there. And, you know, a year will pass, they don't hear from their mate, so they go back. yank him out of the fairy dance, and that person who was in the fairy dance will have lost it, you know, a year, but he will only remember it as a few minutes or an hour or something like that passing. Very, very similar to the modern UFO abduction, where people are abducted, they spend time away, they lose time. The time that they lose away often bears no relationship to what they claim actually occurred during these on-board experiences. Next slide, please. Right, now, in 1974 in Aveley, in Essex, which is where I come from, although I used to live in Avebury for 5 years, I'm now back in Essex. In 1977, I was introduced to this gentleman, John Day, and his wife Sue, and through children. They were driving along a quiet country road on a journey that would normally take them 20 minutes back to their home in Aveley, when they saw a blue oval ball of object go across. It was interesting, they got excited about it, it went out of view. They then rounded a corner, next slide please, it's the corner, and there was a bank of luminous green mist across the road, at which point the car headlights failed, the engine failed, they could not hear the car tyres rolling over the road. Now this was pre-Close Encounters of the Third Kind, let's point this out as well, when the idea of these sort of missing time abductions things was extremely rare in this country, any knowledge to do with it. And they went into this light, it all goes a bit wobbly, they remember being nauseous, they remember almost like some kind of stillness, and then the next thing they know, they're 3/4 of a mile further along the road. Next slide please. That's an image of what the bank of green mist looked like, apparently. Next slide please. And now, this was in 1974 when it occurred. I met them in 1977. In the meantime, they both suffered very strange dreams about, you know, being in like this brightly lit room, these strange gobbling or gnome-like creatures, you know, over them doing something. So this was prior to any kind of hypnosis or anything. And it played on their mind, clearly, and eventually they contacted me. I introduced them to people from Flying Saucer Review and the British UFO Research Association. They arranged hypnosis, and an onboard experience occurred where there were basically two types of beings involved. These strange creatures here with almost like bat-shaped heads. Next slide, please. And also these taller figures, which were about 6.5 feet tall, very albino features when they took the mask off, you know, very white skin, eyes that you know, had no sort of colour in them at all. And it was an onboard experience. I mean, back in the 1970s, I mean, I believed that everything was, you know, nuts and bolts alien hardware anyway. I mean, although I was beginning to, you know, doubt that even by 1977. But there were some strange aspects about this that played on my mind, which probably led to me writing a lot about this subject eventually, and eventually writing, you know, LIGHTQUEST here. And that's the fact that when they came out of the mist, further on down the road, 3 hours missing from their life, by the way, now, the three children were in exactly the same spot as when they went into the mist. One of them that was standing up in the well behind the front two seats was still standing up with one hand on the passenger seat, one hand on the driver's seat. The other two children were still asleep in the back, together, huddled up in exactly the same way. Now, I thought about this, I thought, this is really odd. I mean, if they've been abducted, you know, have the aliens put them back in exactly the right spot, you know, just to sort of, you know, to try and make out that nothing's happened or something, you know, or is it possible that the experience of going into this mist and coming out of it was almost instantaneous, even though in our world 3 hours are somehow missing from their life? Is it almost like they jumped time, that somehow that they were removed from normal space-time during this period and put back? Yes, they were somewhere else, somewhere that I now call a bubble universe, that's some kind of environment that's almost created by the intelligences connected with these lights, with these objects, with these faults, some kind of, you know, consciousness, some kind of alien intelligence. But is it possible that all of this happened outside of normal space-time? Next slide, please. Okay, right, I mentioned it a few times. Plasma. What is plasma? Well, it's called the fourth state of matter in science. The first state being solid stuff. Second state being liquid. Third state being gas. The air around us, for instance. Full state of matter is said to be gas that has been so excited that it gives off photons, which are basically light, and illuminates. It forms its own magnetic fields and exists quite separately to the other three states of matter. That's what plasma is. So plasma is essentially seas of subatomic particles known as electrons that are extremely excited, held within magnetic fields. That ultimately is all they are. I mean, plasma is within your telly, it's within lightning flashes. The sun's almost all plasma, basically, other than the fuel that it burns on. Stars, when you see them twinkling in the sky, they're plasma. Black holes feed off plasma. Plasma essentially fills most of the universe. Most of the universe is not physical matter that we see. Most of it is in a state of plasma. And a lot of work has been done in scientific laboratories around the world, although quite a lot in Eastern Europe, into the properties of plasma. And what a number of scientists have been finding is that plasma, and particularly the electrons within it, acts in a way that appears to be identical to that of cells within biological organisms. In fact, this was first noted by the American-British quantum physicist David Bohm, and his stuff is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, he was a guy that really took the whole idea of quantum weirdness, all the rest of it, and tried to sort of bring it to the public's knowledge within his books and his works and his papers and whatever. But the importance is that he was one of the people that studied these seas of electrons and within plasma environments, and realised that they seem to be acting as if alive. So if they're acting as if alive, maybe they are alive. And he actually began to look at the possibility that there was a deeper level of reality. I mean, he called it the implicate order, something that was almost existed within a subframe of reality that manifests when the opportunity comes into our physical reality, and that he felt that plasma environments was the medium that it could use. And he referred to these intelligences as proto-intelligences that came up from a deeper level of reality, manifest, and then return from whence they came. Now, although this sounds very sort of paranormal or supernatural or whatever, this is a scientist was looking at these ideas. Just look at David Bohm's books, incredible stuff, very advanced. And there was a number of scientists working on this. And what they've concluded is that a separate type of life form may exist within plasma environments. So just in the same way that we need air to breathe, these other intelligences need plasma to exist within. And plasma is your main constituent of your light. Next slide, please. There's a picture of David Bohm himself and some of the other plasma experiments. I do recommend trying to look at some of his books. Next slide, please. Okay, and as I said, this plasma is alive. It's a type of intelligence in its own right. And I think there is every reason to conclude that we are looking at, when you look at UFOs, when they act sentient, when they act conscious, when they act intelligent, you're actually dealing with a completely different type of life form. One that's not biological at all. And I don't think it has ever been biological. I think that it probably evolved quite separate to biological life, maybe billions of years ago. And I think that it is something that's coexisted with humanity and almost certainly other life forms in the universe since time immemorial, and that it interfaces with us in a way which is acceptable to us at any particular period in history. Next slide, please. You know, but for some reason, it mimics almost what we want. And over the last 60, 70 years, I think that it has been mimicking the whole idea of UFOs being alien hardware, and that there's a nice image of a UFO here. I don't know whether it's real or not, but it's a great picture. But if it is real, then this is an example of, you know, a plasma-like entity, a plasma-like form, you know, manifesting in an appearance of a structured craft here, obviously with legs or beams or whatever it is here, to give the impression that this is some kind of alien hardware, when I don't actually think it is. You know, I'm not saying that there are not aliens out there, of course there are, you know, and who knows whether they have been visiting us here on Earth. But what I'm saying is there's something else as well, and that something else, I think, is probably the key to a large majority of UFO sightings and UFO experiences. Next slide, please. And how does it all work? Well, quantum weirdness is the key. There is a process that has been defined and essentially proven again and again within the scientific quantum community, and that's something called entanglement. Now, entanglement is essentially the non-local, and what it means is unconnected communication, instantaneous, between particles that divide. And this is something that happens all the time. Particles divide and become two. And when they become two, if you tweak one, the other one moves in exactly the same way. And it doesn't matter what distance they get. One could be here, one could be the other side of the universe. And the laws of quantum science suggest that they will always respond in this way. And experiments have been done, and they're doing the experiment further and further apart. I think they're now up to about something like 25 miles or something like that. And it works exactly the same. Now, what does this mean? Well, we're not talking about individual little particles here. We're talking about Caesar particles responding and acting in certain ways that respond and act in the same way within other environments. There are other halves somewhere else. There could be half in my head, half in your head, half in me, half in this board here, half, you know, there is an interconnectedness between everything, and not just that, but the transfer of information is instantaneous. Now, the way to see this, you're thinking, okay, this is slightly difficult to conceive of, but you think of two twins. Two twins, you know, one breaks their leg in Australia and the other one in Britain says, ow. You know, that's the type of interconnectedness that we're dealing with. But this interconnectedness is not just something that can go on between us, you know, human beings, but I think it's an interconnectedness between us and the phenomena itself. Next slide, please. And that you might say, okay, well, this is I'm following this, but how's this explain abductions? Well, I think the closer you get to these energy constructs, these light forms, the more weird things occur. Initially, you might get physiological effects, psychological effects, possibly hallucinations, possibly, you know, see visions and whatever. Cars may be affected, instruments affected or whatever. But this is at a distance. This is going to be, let's say, 100 meters or something like that. But the closer you get, the more normal space-time seems to warp or break down to the point where I believe that you actually disappear completely from normal space-time and are taken into a bubble universe, something that overlaps with the three dimensions of space that we deal with normally and the one of time, but there's more. Something unfolds, something unfurls within this, and that when this actually occurs, it creates an environment where you become a part of it with the intelligence, and the intelligence almost feeds and takes information from your mind to create this environment. Now, it's almost like the holodecks out of Star Trek, if you like, but it's very much like a real living dream. You know, in the same way that a dream, when you dream something, sometimes you become aware that, hold on, I've turned around there, that wasn't there earlier on, or that person's changed now, or that person's name's changed, or whatever. You become aware of this generally just before you wake up. And clearly what's happening is the dream environment, the dreamscape that you're in, is being made up as you're going along. You know, in other words, the fact you've just walked along one road and you're now at this point doesn't mean that the road you've walked along in the dream still exists. No, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. You know, it's only being created as you're experiencing it. And I think that that's exactly what happens within these bubble universes, as I like to call them. That essentially today, for some reason, we have seen fit to have this interaction, this communion, if you like, with these intelligences as alien hardware, being inside, you know, the rooms of a spaceship, meeting what we consider to be, you know, physical aliens or whatever. But for some reason, that's what we want, individually and collectively. But in the past, we would encounter the fairies, or we would suddenly find ourselves in front of Jesus Christ and be taken off to the kingdom of heaven, or, you know, perhaps be, you know, whisked off to hell or something like that and be tortured by demons, whatever. Whatever our brains seem to allow and almost want and desire in these experiences seems to actually take place. But what's really taking place is some kind of interface, an interaction, a communion between us and this phenomena. And I think that, you know, the phenomena itself is very real. I think it's coexisted with us for, you know, probably not hundreds, but many thousands, if not millions of years. I mean, in other words, it's always been there. I think it's terrestrial in the sense that it manifests here, but it's also extraterrestrial in the sense that it could be here at one point and it could be at the other end of the universe at another point. It uses plasma in the same way that we breathe air. It needs these environments initially to manifest, and once it gains a grip within plasma environments, I think it can solidify, if only on a temporary level. But essentially, the images of the next slide, please. The images that we have, you know, of the aliens and the rest of it, that's almost of our making, almost. Yes, there is some reality to it, you know, because there's been consistency in what we've seen across hundreds of years. I mean, the alien greys, for instance, are merely updated fairies, elves and goblins of yesteryear. You know, there's an update, there is a continuity here. However, I think that these intelligences are pure energy. Ultimately, they don't need any kind of form at all. It's only us that needs to see them having some kind of form. Next slide, please. So, going back to that wonderful case that I gave you at the beginning of this lecture on Silbury Hill, you know, the couple that went up there with their friend in 1994. This is the sort of stuff that's on offer if you want. What I've done with LIGHTQUEST is to not just, you know, put together a whole load of theories, but each different section of the book is about a different UFO hotspot, what you see there, the experiences that have occurred there, where to go, the background to the place, and exactly what to do when you go there. So that if you really want this type of experience, if you want this type of interaction, you know, I would really recommend getting this book. Thank you very much. Cheers.